By morning, the resort was gone. Not damaged, gone. The Grand Hotel, the verandas, the summer rooms, the music, the voices, the people who had come to the Gulf for air and comfort, all of it had been thrown into the dark by wind and water. The night before, Last Island looked like a refuge, a narrow strip of Louisiana sand, a fashionable escape from heat, sickness, and city life. Roughly 400 people were on the island. Nearly 200 people at the resort were killed. Measured by death toll, the Last Island hurricane still ranks among the 10 deadliest U.S. mainland hurricanes on record. But the question is not why those people were foolish. They were not. The real question is why anyone had learned to trust the island in the first place. Because Last Island was beautiful. It was popular. It was familiar. But it was never safe in the way people wanted it to be. Before the storm, it looked like a resort. After it, there was barely an island left to find. To understand how a resort could vanish, we have to start with why people trusted it. This is the story of Last Island and the hurricane that erased a Louisiana resort. Last Island, also known as Isle Dernière, sat off the coast of Louisiana. It was part of a chain of barrier islands, low strips of land shaped by waves, tides, wind, and storms. But to the people who traveled there in the 1850s, Last Island was not a warning sign. It was a destination, a summer retreat. A place where families, politicians, planters, and visitors could escape heat, sickness, and crowded inland towns. The Gulf breeze felt like relief. The distance from the mainland felt like protection, and the resort made the island feel permanent. That is one of the dangerous tricks a place can play on people. A hotel does not make land stable. A crowd does not make a choice safe. And a familiar trip does not erase the risk underneath it. But familiarity is powerful. When people return to a place year after year, it begins to feel proven. Boats arrive, rooms open, porches fill with conversation, and normal starts to look a lot like safe. That was the hidden mistake at Last Island. The island was low, the resort was exposed, the Gulf was close. But in calm weather, those dangers were easy to mistake for charm. Open water, fresh air, distance from the mainland. The very things that made Last Island attractive were also the things that made it vulnerable. In good weather, it looked like leisure. In a hurricane, it could become a trap. A barrier island is not a fortress. It is a moving edge between land and sea. Waves push sand. Tides reshape the shore, storms cut through weak places. In ordinary weather, the change can feel slow. In a hurricane, it can happen in hours. Wind drives water toward land. Storm surge lifts the sea higher than it belongs. Waves ride on top of that surge. Then the water crosses beaches, tears through dunes, and reaches places people thought were safely inland. On a low barrier island, there may be no real high ground, no deep interior, no easy place to hide from water coming from more than one direction. That was the physical reality beneath the resort. The hotel looked solid. The island did not have to be. And when the Gulf changed, the island's geography became the danger. In August of 1856, a hurricane moved through the Gulf toward Louisiana. Today, a storm like that would be watched for days. Satellites would track it. Forecast models would update. Warnings would spread across phones, television screens, and maps. People might still disagree about what to do, but they would know a dangerous storm was coming. The people on Last Island had none of that. There was no radar, no satellite image, no forecast cone, no easy road inland. Weather could be watched. Wind could rise, the sea could begin to look wrong. But understanding the size, track, and strength of a hurricane before it arrived was another matter. And once the weather worsened, leaving Last Island was not simple. You could not load a car and drive away. You could not walk inland. The same water that brought guests to the resort now controlled whether they could escape. Boats mattered. Timing mattered. Wind, surf, and visibility mattered. Every hour made escape less likely. And once the storm fully arrived, even the things that might have meant escape would be pulled into the disaster. As conditions deteriorated, people tried to hold the world together. Some later accounts describe music being used to calm frightened guests as the weather worsened. Not because they understood exactly what was coming and ignored it, but because people in a crisis often try to preserve order for as long as they can. A room, a song, a familiar routine. Anything that makes the world feel manageable for one more minute. Outside, the Gulf was becoming something else. The water was rising, the wind was building, and the island that had felt like an escape was becoming exactly the wrong place to be. When the hurricane struck, Last Island's weakness was no longer hidden. The storm did not simply hit the resort, it attacked the island itself. Wind tore across the coast, waves crashed into the shore. Storm surge pushed water over land that people had treated as safe. The beach was no longer the edge of a vacation, it was the front line of the disaster. Water crossed the island, debris moved with it, buildings began to give way, and the places that had felt ordinary only hours before became dangerous from every direction. Rooms, porches, walkways, paths between buildings, all of them now belonged to the storm. As the water rose and buildings gave way, people searched for the highest ground they could find. But on Last Island, there was almost no high ground to find. Some tried to reach the steamer Star, which lay nearby. But the storm was so powerful that the boat itself was wrecked. One contemporary newspaper account reported that many people perished trying to reach it, while others survived by clinging to its shattered remains. The thing that might have meant escape became wreckage, and for some, that wreckage became the only solid thing left. The resort had been built for summer, for guests, for sea air, for a world where the Gulf stayed outside. It had not been built for a hurricane powerful enough to change the ground beneath it. This is where the story becomes hardest to tell, because disasters are often remembered through numbers, and numbers can make horror feel clean. Roughly 400 people were on the island, nearly 200 people at the resort were killed. But behind those numbers were families, workers, guests, boat crews, people who had come to a place they believed could hold them. The storm did not punish them for being foolish. It exposed the false promise of the place around them. The water was too high. The wind was too strong. The margin for survival was too small. By the time the storm passed, the resort world had been broken, and Last Island was no longer the island people had arrived on. After the hurricane, the story of Last Island traveled through newspapers in blunt, shocking language. Reports described the island as submerged. They called it an awful calamity. They carried casualty numbers that stunned readers far from the coast. Those newspapers matter because they show how the disaster entered public memory. But they were also contemporary reports, written in the confusion after catastrophe. The exact numbers and details could shift from account to account. The larger truth did not. Last Island had been devastated, the resort had been destroyed, and the confidence people had placed in that narrow strip of sand did not survive the storm. The island was not merely damaged, it was changed. A hurricane can take a coastline people think they understand and redraw it in a single night. It can open water where people expected ground, leave wreckage where people expected return, and turn a summer destination into a warning. After 1856, Last Island's life as a famous resort destination was over. The place people had trusted for comfort had revealed something much harder. A beautiful place can still be temporary. A familiar place can still be fragile. And a resort can make dangerous ground look safe. Right up until the moment the storm arrives. The wrong move at Last Island was not one reckless choice. It was the slower decision to confuse normalcy with safety. People saw a hotel, they saw guests, they saw boats, they saw summer routine, and those signs made the island feel permanent. But survival up to yesterday is not a promise about tomorrow. Last Island looked like a refuge. Then the weather changed, and the island became a lesson. Not about foolish victims, but about fragile places, limited warnings, and the danger of trusting a world that only seems permanent because the storm has not arrived yet. Next time, the mistake would not be a resort island. It would be a symbol of the future, floating above the world until the future caught fire.